Hello and welcome to this Affinity Photo tutorial where I'll be looking at sharpening your images using either a filter or not a filter. Now this all came about from the latest issue of Digital Camera magazine, in which they gave a Photoshop tutorial which showed 4 different ways of sharpening your image, 3 of them without using a filter, and the last one using high pass, which is a filter in Affinity Photo. Whether it is a filter in Photoshop I really don't know. As they included it in their video, I'm guessing it is maybe not a filter in Affinity Photo, but I'm quite prepared to be corrected on that issue. So I thought I'd sort of see whether, as it worked in Photoshop, whether those 4 ways worked in Affinity Photo. I was pretty certain they should, and so this is my video, and I'm going to look at using the filters as well as the non-filter way. Now, in the digital camera video they used a texture, so I'm going to go down that same road, because you can then see the different textures when we sharpen them. But I mean, this should work on any sort of image. Now, I got this particular texture from a different magazine's free giveaway, so I can't give you a link to this particular texture, but you could just find any texture or whatever image you want to sharpen. So I've just renamed this original image because I don't want to lose that. I want to make sure that I keep this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click that layer and click duplicate, and then work on that layer there, and I'm just going to call that copy. So this is the layer that I'm going to work on. Now the first step in the magazine's way of sharpening was to put it into, I believe it's Camera Raw, and then sort of add sharpening there. Now the nearest thing we have to like Camera Raw, as I understand it from the Photoshop tutorials I've watched, is the develop persona, because we're currently in the photo persona. So if I click on develop persona, we will then be moved over to the develop persona, and we have the options. We've got different tabs. You've got basics, and one of the other tabs is details. So if I click on details and click on detail refinement, you can increase the radius and then the amount of sharpening or detail refinement. Obviously the higher you push it, the more sort of sharper it will become, and it will start to look pretty horrible. So it's more a case of just subtle increments until you're happy with the results. Now one thing I must say here is I've always found personally that the way it looks on here, it looks good to me, and when I click develop, some of that sharpness is lost when it goes back to the photo persona. So I do slightly get into the habit of increasing this a bit more than I think it should be, and then when I click on develop, it goes back to the photo persona. It is reduced slightly in its sharpness, and so if I turn this copy off, that was the original. Let me zoom in. So if we look at sort of this area here, so for example, if I turn the copy back on, hopefully you can see that that is now sort of sharpened the image there. So let me just zoom back out again. So that would be like the first way. And also what I could have done while it was in the develop persona, if I go back to that, I could have added clarity, which is also a way of adding sharpening. So you could have gone with detail, refinement and or clarity, one or the other, and even adding a bit of contrast will help sort of bring out some details. So that's the first way is using the develop persona. So let me just turn that off for a second, and I will make another copy of this. I'll call this copy 1. So we're now going to look at the second way of sharpening this image. So this way is to add a black and white adjustment layer. Now adjustment layers you can be added from clicking on this half black and white circle up here, or you can also do it from, it's been so long since I did it this way, new adjustment layer, and then pick an option from there, but I always do it from this half black and white circle. Just click on that to get the options, and then come up to black and white, and I'm not going to make any alterations, so I'll just close that down straight away. What I will do is change the blend mode of this layer from normal to overlay, and that will make the image much darker, but it is also a bit over the top, the effect. So I'm just going to drop the opacity down to pretty much 0, and then just slowly creep it up, somewhere between say 15 and 50%, depending on your particular taste. I'm going to go, that's about 38% there. So I'll turn that off and on. You can see that it's sort of helping to sharpen that texture. So let me turn those two off, and I will copy this again, and we'll call this copy 2. So this is now the version that we are going to be working on, and we're going to look at the next way of sharpening the image. And this time we're going to sort of darken the image to help sharpen it. So what I'm going to do is again come to the adjustments, come up to levels, and much like what I did with the black and white, I'm not going to make any alterations. I'm just going to close that down, and again we will change the blend mode, but this time change it to multiply, and as you can see this has made the whole image much darker, and it will also sort of oversaturate the colours a bit. So to help compensate the saturation part of that, we're going to just make a merged visible layer, and the easiest way to do that is to highlight the top layer, which is currently this levels one, and right click on that and come up to merge visible, and then change the blend mode of this to luminosity, and we can turn off the levels adjustment that's below that, so that will knock back some of the extra colours that have been added. And then to sort of just lighten this a bit, add another adjustment, which is the curves adjustment, and then just sort of click roughly in the middle and push it, click and hold and push it up to the left, maybe to about there for example. So if I highlight those two layers and turn them off, that was the original, which is down here, or the copy I should say. And if I turn them back on, that is the sharpening done, made using the levels, the merge visible, sorry, couldn't get the words out, and then the curves just to lighten it up. So let me delete all of those there. It's getting a bit messy with all those different versions. So there are three ways of sort of sharpening an image without using any of the filters. So now let's have a look at using the filters. So again, I'm going to do this on the copy rather than the original layer. Now filters obviously can be found in the filters menu, and you click on that and you've got a sharpen option, and you've got three filters: the unsharp, mask, clarity and high pass. So I'll be looking at the high pass version first, and the best way to do this is, like I've done here, I've made a copy of the original. Now with the high pass, this is something you'd have to do. You don't sort of affect your original image. So as soon as I want to keep that as my original, I'm going to sort of, this is technically would be my original, so I'm going to duplicate this, and we're going to add the filter to the duplicate of this layer. So it's filters, sharpen, high pass, and the high pass filter will sort of add this grey. If I bring this all the way down to zero, pretty much zero, it just adds a grey sort of fill layer on top of that layer there, and you just then increase the radius, and it will add sort of contrast to the image below the grey. Now you really don't want to go too high with this, but you don't necessarily want to go too low either, because it's very difficult to work out what effect you're really having just by looking at the grey here. So most people will go for somewhere about 3, 4, 5 pixels, but it might be easier to go a bit slightly higher than that. Let's say 10 pixels roughly, near as I can get to, 9.9, and then click apply, and then you have to change the blend mode to overlay, and where that is, if I turn that on and off, hopefully you can see how much effect that is having. But even 10 pixels is probably too much, so it's then easier to lower the opacity of that, and you have a much better visual guide using the opacity to alter the high pass if you've made it slightly more than you need, than it is to try and affect the grey image before you change the blend mode. So you can do it either way. You can either use just the grey layer and alter the amount of pixels, or just make it slightly more than you think you need, and then tinker with the opacity afterwards to get the image you want. It's probably easier to do it visually using the opacity. So that is just a very subtle way of doing that. So I'm just going to delete that. Now before I go on to the other two filters, I do want to say that that filter is using it from that menu is what is known as using doing it destructively. You can do it undestructively using live filters. Now, I'm not certain whether Photoshop has an equivalent to a live filter, which is maybe why they included it in their video. But you can, again, you can add live filters from, again, it's something I've not done for quite a while. Oh, here we go. Live filters is in the layers menu, so you can do it that way. I always do my live filters from clicking on this sort of two triangles stacked on top of each other icon in the layers menu, and then you have the high pass, unsharp mask and clarity included in that. So if I click on high pass, it will make the high pass filter a child of that duplicate layer that I had, and again it's set on 0, so you can't see it at anything at the moment. But if I bring this up to, again, up to 10, let's say, or as close as I can get it, and then change the blend mode to overlay, it will have the same effect as what I did before, but this way, because it is a child layer and a live filter, I can always open it up again and tinker with the settings at any point. You know, even if I've made loads more adjustments, I can always come back and raise or lower that adjustment using the live filter. You could also, like before, alter the opacity and sort of alter the effect that way. So live filters are probably the better way to go when it comes to using filters, rather than the destructive method of, once you've added it and used it, you can't go back and alter it. A live filter, you can always go back and alter it. So that's the high pass. Let me just delete this one and duplicate that again. So now we're going to look at one of the other filters. So I'm not going to go via the filters menu, I'm going to go via the live filters and try clarity. Now clarity, sort of, as I understand it, only really affects the midtones of an image, and you're just sort of just going to affect making the midtones either darker or lighter, and if you go to the right it will make them a bit darker, which is probably the direction you want to go if you're just going to use the clarity. So if I go up to 100, if I turn that on and off, hopefully you can see how much sharper that is made just by using the clarity. Like all these filters, it's probably best just to do it subtly rather than crank it right up to 100 or whatever you. So that is the clarity. Let me just delete that, and then we can look at the unsharp mask, which I've never fully understand its naming. You'd think with a name like unsharp it would decrease an image sharpness, but it increases an image sharpness. And you have a radius, factor and a threshold slider, so you can increase the radius of pixels that are being affected, and again you got the threshold. I think the higher you push the threshold the less effect it has, so you want a sort of fairly low number of threshold, and then sort of really, I mean I would have a fairly low, say 1 pixel radius, and then use the factor slider to get the sharpness that you like. So hopefully if I turn this on and off, you can see what effect that is having. Again, if I zoom in to there, that's unsharped, and that is with the sharpening added. So basically that is it. 6 different ways to sharpen an image, 3 of them without using filters and 3 using filters. Hopefully this has all made sense, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.